It was just another Tuesday night at the Golden Grill, a diner in downtown Toronto, Canada. Not fancy, but the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the light was always a little too harsh. The main person we need to talk about right now is a young woman named Ailey Dubois. Ailey was 23 years old, and she moved through the tight aisles of the Golden Grill like a ghost. She was a waitress, and a good one, but she never really looked like she belonged there. She had a quiet strength about her, the kind you only notice if you look twice. She was black, and her skin was the color of rich cocoa butter. She was slender, almost delicate, but if you paid close attention when she lifted a heavy tray of plates, you could see the lean, powerful muscles in her arms. Right now, her dark, tight curls were pulled back into a severe, neat bun, tucked under a small, white cap. She wore the standard uniform, a faded mint green dress shirt and a black apron tied tightly around her waist. Ailey's eyes were the most interesting thing about her. They were large and intensely focused, the color of dark amber, and they always seemed to be watching, assessing, but giving nothing away. They carried a deep-down tiredness, the kind that comes from not just working hard, but from trying to keep a secret buried deep underground. Tonight, she was thinking about rent. She was saving every single dollar she owned, pulling double shifts and sometimes triple ones. Her goal was to disappear completely, to move somewhere remote, maybe a small town in New Brunswick or deep into the mountains of Colorado. She just wanted to be forgotten. She wanted her old life to stay dead and gone. Around 8 p.m., the usual dinner rush had died down. Ailey was wiping the counter, humming a forgotten tune, when the whole atmosphere of the diner changed. It didn't change because the lights flickered or the music stopped. It changed because he walked in. The man's name was Jae-hoon Kwon. If fear had a face and a tailored suit, it would look exactly like Jae-hoon. He was only 32, but he already ran the entire East Coast operations for the biggest, most ruthless Korean crime syndicate. He was feared from Seoul to Seattle, and tonight, he was in Toronto for reasons nobody in that diner wanted to know. Jae-hoon was tall and sharp. His suit was dark charcoal, cut perfectly to his lean, strong frame. His hair was slicked back, showing off a perfectly carved, arrogant jawline. He was Korean, and his skin was pale, making the dark intensity of his eyes even more chilling. They were flat black, like polished stones, and they never smiled. They only looked, judged, and dismissed. He didn't just walk into the diner, he arrived. Behind him marched two men. One was massive, a black man named Marcus who looked like he could snap a baseball bat in half. The other, thinner and more viper-like, was named Chen, and he constantly scanned the room. These weren't just bodyguards, they were loyal shadows, and their presence alone made the customers at the booth suddenly stop chewing. Jae-hoon didn't look at the menu. He simply pointed one expensive watch-adorned hand at a table and sat down. Ailey felt the familiar icy knot tighten in her stomach. She knew his type. People like this boss, powerful, cruel, and completely convinced of their own importance. They were the reason she was hiding in a diner uniform in the first place. She took a deep breath and walked to the table. She kept her gaze focused on the notepad. "Good evening," Ailey said, her voice soft but professional. "What can I get for you?" Jae-hoon didn't look up. He was fiddling with the silver cufflink on his left wrist. "Bring me your best steak. Medium rare. And a bottle of your finest aged whiskey. If you even have such a thing in this establishment." His voice was low, carrying a soft Korean lilt mixed with the hard edge of absolute authority. Ailey paused. "Sir, this is a diner. We have steak, but our finest liquor is probably—" "Don't tell me what you have," he cut her off, his eyes finally lifting. They met hers, and for a split second, Ailey felt that cold, assessing look pierce right through her. "Tell me what you are going to bring me. And make it quick. I don't like waiting for people who are paid to serve me." Ailey forced a slight, professional smile. "I'll bring you the steak and the best bourbon we have, sir. Right away." She turned before she could say something she'd regret. The rest of the meal passed with oppressive silence. Jae-hoon ate alone while his men stood sentinel-like behind him, ensuring no other waiter dared approach. Then came the moment that changed everything. Ailey was clearing a nearby table. She had her back to Jae-hoon's booth, stacking plates carefully. Jae-hoon finished his meal and, instead of standing, he casually tossed his crumpled linen napkin toward the floor. It didn't land on the floor, though. It missed and landed squarely in the half-eaten plate of the customer at the next table, a kindly older man who had been nervously watching the whole event. The older man, named Walter, gasped in surprise. "Oh, excuse me, sir," he started to say, picking up the soiled napkin with shaky fingers. Jae-hoon glared at him, a flicker of pure disgust crossing his face. "Watch yourself, old man. Keep your nose out of business that doesn't concern you." Alias saw the flash of humiliation on Walter's face, a good man made to feel small just because this crime boss was bored. Something snapped inside her. It was the sound of her carefully constructed piece cracking. She walked straight to Jae-hoon's table, ignoring the silent warning glare from his guards. "Sir, the trash can is right here," she said calmly, pointing to the silver bin near the booth. She reached down and politely retrieved the napkin from the wrong plate. "It's just easier for us all if the used napkins go in the can." Jae-hoon slowly leaned back in the booth, his eyes narrowing to slits. The entire diner went completely silent. You could hear the sputtering of the fry machine in the kitchen. "You have a nerve, little maid," Jae-hoon said, his voice dangerously soft. "I pay for the food, I can throw the napkin anywhere I want. Who are you to lecture me on where to put my trash?" "I'm the person who cleans it up," Ailey replied, keeping her voice level. "And I was simply suggesting a quicker way to do things." This wasn't just about a napkin anymore. It was about power. It was about a man who was used to crushing people beneath his heel encountering a young woman who refused to flinch. Jae-hoon let out a short, cold laugh that held no humor. "You know, I don't like your eyes. They're too knowing. They don't show the right amount of fear," he sneered, finally rising from the booth. He stood close to her, towering over her slight frame. "I think you need to be taught a lesson in respect." He lifted his hand, not to hit her, but to humiliate her further. He gave her a hard, rough shove against her chest. Ailey stumbled back a step, catching herself instantly, her amber eyes burning now. The hidden fire in her was finally reaching the surface. "See?" Jae-hoon mocked, gesturing to his guards with a bored wave. "Weak. Pathetic. Just like all the other peasants who tried to play hero." He took a step closer, his face inches from hers, enjoying the fear he thought he saw. "You think you're tough? You think you're special?" He looked around the horrified, frozen crowd in the diner and laughed again. "I challenge you, little waitress. Fight me. Right here. Let's see how tough that little stare of yours really is when your face is on the floor." The silence that followed this demand was heavy enough to crush bones. The patrons thought the waitress was done for. The bodyguards smirked. Jae-hoon looked utterly certain of his victory. But Ailey wasn't looking at Jae-hoon's mocking face. She was looking past him, at the window, at the dark, rainy street outside. She saw a flicker of her old life, the life she had tried to bury, the life that demanded justice and strength. She suddenly dropped the handful of napkins and the wet rag she was holding. Her stance shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Her feet went shoulder-width apart, her weight settled low, and her hands curled into fists that looked surprisingly solid. "Sir, I am not a fighter," Ailey said. Her voice was steady. Too steady. "Of course, you aren't. You're just a maid." Jae-hoon crowed triumphantly. He took one last aggressive step forward, raising his own hands in a lazy, amateurish defense pose, ready to simply slap her away. "Now, get ready for your lesson." Ailey didn't waste words. She didn't move her feet. She simply rotated her entire body, unleashing the power stored in her legs and core, transferring it all into her right arm. It was a perfect straight right. The punch was flawless. It was fast, clean, and delivered with the technical perfection of a genuine champion. It connected with the side of Jae-hoon's jaw with a sickening crack. It was the sound of a bowling ball hitting wood. The Mafia boss's eyes went wide, not with pain, but with utter, shocking incomprehension. He had not seen it coming. Nobody had. The power was so concentrated that his whole body lifted slightly off the floor, even the ground beneath the soles of his expensive shoes seeming to shudder. Jae-hoon Kwon, the fearsome boss of one of the world's most powerful crime families, the man who instilled terror with a glance, dropped like a stone. He hit the cheap, checkered floor tiles of the Golden Grill diner, and he did not move again. He was instantly, completely unconscious. The diner was silent. So silent that when the little silver bell on the door jiggled from a slight breeze, the sound was deafening. Marcus, the giant bodyguard, blinked once. Then twice. Chen, the Viper, froze with his hand halfway toward the hidden pistol under his suit jacket. All eyes were on Ailu. She stood there, breathing evenly, her right fist slightly extended, already relaxing the muscles that had just delivered the punch that shook the entire underworld to its foundations. Her amber eyes held no triumph, only a deep, weary regret. I told him I wasn't a fighter, Ailu whispered, mostly to herself. Marcus finally moved. He let out a low, guttural roar and lunged toward Ailu, his hands already grappling for her neck. But Ailu was faster. She wasn't focused on Marcus, though. She was focused on the exit, on survival. She sidestepped the massive man easily, dipping low beneath his reaching arm. As she passed, she delivered a sharp, unexpected elbow strike right into the solar plexus of Chen, who was just pulling out his weapon. Chen gagged, dropping his gun, stumbling back against the counter. Ailu didn't pause to look at the destruction she caused. The waitress uniform suddenly seemed ridiculous, a cheap costume that couldn't hide the powerhouse beneath. She reached the door, pulled it open, and slipped out into the cold, rainy Toronto night. The moment she was outside, the adrenaline faded, replaced by cold dread. Her secret, the one she had guarded with her life for 3 long years, was gone. Shattered by one moment of necessary, reckless violence. She knew she had done the right thing for Walter, the old man, and for the last scrap of her own dignity. But she also knew exactly what she had done to herself. She hadn't just knocked out a man, she had declared war on an empire. She was running now, her apron flapping behind her, the rhythm of her feet a familiar drumbeat of panic. She was running from a life that had finally found her. As she sprinted down the dark alley, the only sound was the rain and the distant siren of a police car, maybe called by a witness in the diner. The quiet waitress was gone. The champion, the fighter, was back. And she was in more trouble than she had ever been in her life. Ailu didn't stop running until she reached the relative safety of her apartment building. It wasn't much, a tiny, cramped space in a rundown part of the city, but it was her safe house. At least, it had been. She reached her front door, fumbled with the key, and slammed the door shut behind her, leaning against the cold wood, gasping for breath. The rain had soaked her uniform, and her hair bun had come loose, the tight curls now spilling messily around her face. Inside the small apartment, the only light came from a single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. There was a worn couch, a small kitchen area with cracked tiles, and a cheap mattress on the floor in the corner that served as her bed. She walked over to the tiny, rusty sink and splashed cold water on her face. As she looked into the mirror, she saw the exhaustion, but beneath it, she saw a spark that had been missing for years. The boxer was awake. Ailu knew the rule: when you fight a king, you must be ready for the entire army to come for you. And Jae-hoon Kwon was definitely a king. She pulled off the diner uniform, throwing the mint green shirt onto the floor. Underneath, she wore a simple, sleeveless black tank top that showed the definition in her shoulders. Her body was a roadmap of disciplined training and past battles. Her mind raced. She had to move fast. She had maybe an hour, tops, before Jae-hoon's men woke him up or before they realized who had hit him. They would tear that diner apart, find her address on the employee file, and be knocking down this door. She walked quickly to the closet, which contained only a few meager changes of clothes. But hidden behind a false panel, secured with a small, heavy padlock, was a metal box. Ailu pulled out a small, old, worn leather-bound journal and a heavy passport. She also took out a wad of cash, the hard-earned money from 2 years of working in that miserable diner, stacking plates and taking insults. It wasn't enough to disappear forever, but it was enough to buy her a few days of lead time. It's time to call Leo, she thought. The one person I swore I would never put in danger again. Leo Maxwell was her former manager and trainer. A kind, rugged black man in his late 50s who lived in Kingston, Jamaica, running a small, slightly shabby boxing gym by the coast. He had been a father figure to her after her own life fell apart. He was the one who taught her how to fight, how to survive, and how to punch with the force of a wrecking ball. He knew her secret, and he was the only one. She reached for her old, beaten-up flip phone, the kind that couldn't be tracked, and hesitated. Making that call was not just asking for help, it was dragging Leo into the crosshairs of the Korean Mafia. But she had no choice. She was already dead if she stayed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the well-remembered number. It rang 3 times before a gruff, familiar voice answered. Hello? Who is this? If this is about the gym rates, call back after 8, man, Leo grumbled, his Jamaican accent thick and warm. Leo, it's me. It's Ailey, she whispered into the phone. The voice on the other end went instantly, chillingly quiet. The warmth vanished. Ailey. Oh, God, Ailey. I told you never to call this number unless the worst happened. What happened? Tell me what happened, child. His voice was laced with deep concern and fear. Ailey closed her eyes, forcing herself to be calm, professional. The fighter had to talk, not the waitress. I broke the rule, Leo. I had to. Someone challenged me. A very powerful someone. A Korean man. Mafia, I think. Very dangerous. I knocked him out cold, Leo. In a crowded place. They saw me. A long, painful silence stretched across the thousands of miles between them. You broke the rule. You used the right hand, Leo said, his voice flat with realization. You know what this means, right? Everything we worked for, all the hiding. I know, Ailey interrupted, tears pricking her eyes, but she fought them down. It's over. I have to go underground completely. I need your help, Leo. I need a place to disappear. A deep hole, somewhere they can't find me. Can you do it? Leo sighed, the sound loud and heavy, like air escaping a tire. You are family, child. Always. This Korean syndicate, they are dogs, but they are smart dogs. They will hunt you like no one else. But I have one place. It's risky. A friend's fishing boat runs from Miami down to a small island chain in the Caribbean, not far from here. It's totally off-grid. But you need to get to Miami first. Tonight. Ailey's heart pounded. Miami was 1,000 miles away. I can do it, she said, her voice regaining its iron strength. I'm on my way to the station now. I'll take a bus. I'll make the connection. Tell me where to meet the boat. Leo spent the next 10 minutes giving her coded instructions, telling her what to wear, who to look for, and exactly how much money to carry. Ailey, Leo said, just before hanging up, his voice cracking slightly. Be safe. And remember what I taught you. The fight starts now. I remember, Leo. Thank you. She hung up, dropped the cheap phone back in the metal box, and quickly began packing a small backpack. Only essentials, a few dark clothes, the journal, the passport, and the cash. As she packed, she caught her reflection again. The amber eyes looked fierce now, ready. The waitress had made a huge mistake, but the boxer was ready to face the consequences. She had sought peace and found only war. But perhaps, just perhaps, fighting for her life was the only way she would ever find true freedom. The punch that shook the underworld was thrown. Now she had to survive the aftershocks. She zipped up the bag, took one last look around the tiny apartment, the apartment where she had hoped to finally build a quiet life, and opened the door. The sound of the key turning in the lock was final. She was leaving Toronto, leaving the past behind, but walking straight into a future of danger. The fight for justice, dignity, and survival had begun. Hope was a flicker, but it was enough to keep her moving. Ailey Dubois had only one real plan, run. But running wasn't just about moving her body, it was about shifting her mind. The gentle, apologetic waitress had to be packed away, replaced by the sharp, defensive athlete. She moved through the cold, early morning streets of Toronto, dressed in simple, dark jeans, a thick hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. Her skin, once a noticeable feature in the brightly lit diner, now helped her blend into the shadows of the city before dawn. She wasn't taking a bus directly to Miami. That would be too predictable for Jae-hoon Kwon's organization, which she knew would be checking every flight, train, and bus manifest. Instead, she bought a ticket on a regional bus headed west, toward Buffalo, New York. From there, she would buy another ticket south, hopping from city to city, mixing up her route, paying for everything in cash only. She was trying to become a ghost, using the vast, anonymous network of North American travel. As the bus pulled out of the station, Ailey sank into a window seat, watching the city lights blur away. She was exhausted, but sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every jolt of the bus, every new face that boarded, made her heart hammer against her ribs. She was alone, running on adrenaline and the knowledge that she had just made an enemy who had endless resources and zero mercy. Meanwhile, back at the Golden Grill, the first domino had already fallen, triggering a massive wave. A young man named Ricardo, who usually washed dishes in the kitchen, had been sitting at the counter trying to sneak in a quick bite when the whole confrontation went down. Ricardo was 19, small, nervous, and obsessed with social media. He wasn't thinking about crime syndicates or consequences, he was thinking about clicks. His phone had been recording everything, from the moment Jae-hoon shoved Ailey, to the split-second flash of her punch, to the heavy, unbelievable thud of the boss hitting the floor. The video was shaky, but the sound, that shocking crack, was crystal clear. Ricardo called the file, with the casual creativity of his generation, Waitress One Punch KO, Mafia Boss Edition. He uploaded it immediately, tagging the location and every popular hashtag he could think of. By the time Ailey's bus was halfway to Buffalo, the video already had tens of thousands of views and was starting to spread like wildfire. The first major person the video reached was Jae-hoon Kwon. He was not in the hospital, as many might expect. His bodyguards, Marcus and Chen, had dragged his unconscious, humiliated form into the back of a black SUV and sped away to a private, luxury home outside the city. Jae-hoon woke up in a guest room, his head pounding with a pain he hadn't felt since he was a teenage street fighter. He touched his jaw. It was swollen, tender, but thankfully not broken. The pain was physical, but the injury to his pride was catastrophic. He sat up, his eyes burning with cold rage. Marcus and Chen stood before him, pale and nervous. Who was she? Jae-hoon's voice was a low, terrifying growl. Marcus, the larger man, swallowed hard. Her name is Ailey Dubois, boss. Waitress. Part-time. We got her file from the manager. Lives in the city. When we went to her apartment, it was empty. Cleaned out. She's gone. Jae-hoon didn't need to ask if they had found the diner video. The look on his guards' faces told him the world knew. He reached for the phone Chen was holding out and watched the 30-second clip. He watched the casual insult, the confident swagger of his past self, and then the flash of power, the perfect rotation, the textbook technique. He watched himself fall like a sack of rice. He watched it 3 times. The blood drained from his face, leaving only fury behind. She is not a waitress, Jae-hoon stated, his voice now dangerously calm. She is trained. That was not luck. That was a specialist. A professional. He looked at Marcus, his face expressionless. Find her. Now. Use every connection. Every camera. Every dollar. I don't care if she's hiding on the moon. Bring her to me. And Marcus. Jae-hoon leaned forward, the black eyes pinning his guard. I don't want her killed. I want her broken. I want her to understand the cost of embarrassing Kwon Jae-hoon. The hunt was officially on. Jae-hoon's network, which spanned 3 continents and included corrupt officials, hackers, and countless eyes on the street, began turning the city inside out. But the video wasn't just interesting to the people Jae-hoon controlled. It had, as the title suggests, gone viral in the wrong circles. In a penthouse office overlooking the lights of Manhattan, a woman was watching the video on a massive screen. Her name was Victoria Vance. She was an African-American woman in her late 40s, dressed in an impeccably tailored, vibrant red pantsuit. She was a billionaire several times over, having made her fortune in high-end private security, but her true power lay in her side business, running the most lucrative, secretive underground fighting ring in the Western Hemisphere. Victoria took a slow sip of her crystal-clear scotch. Her face, framed by stylish, short, silver-streaked hair, showed a mixture of shock and sheer delight. Look at that timing, Elias, she said to the stone-looking white man standing beside her. Elias Grant was her chief of operations and a former world champion kickboxer. Perfect. Absolutely flawless. Textbook mechanics. Where did that come from? Elias's voice was tight with professional respect. Victoria pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the screen. A waitress in a mint green dress, Elias. This little one, this Ailey Dubois, she just embarrassed the Kwon Syndicate on camera. That kind of skill doesn't come from a weekly boxercise class. She smiled, a slow, predatory curve of her lips. She's running, naturally. The Kwon family won't let this go. They will hunt her down. But if we find her first, imagine what she could do in the ring. She is fast. She is powerful. She is marketable. Victoria Vance picked up her phone. Start digging, Elias. I want to know everything about Ailey Dubois. Her history, her past fights, her training. I want her to disappear into my network before Jaehoon's dogs can get their teeth into her. As the world debated the identity of the mysterious waitress, Ailey was enduring a cramped, smelly 15-hour bus ride, trying to look like nothing more than a student catching up on sleep. She arrived in the middle of Pennsylvania at a sprawling bus depot, a neutral ground where she hoped to melt away again. She knew she couldn't risk another big bus line. She needed to go smaller. She found a dingy, cash-only rental car place a few blocks from the depot. The owner was a kind, sleepy-eyed woman named Martha, who didn't ask any questions as Ailey paid a huge sum of cash for a beat-up sedan. Ailey started driving south. She drove for hours, pushing herself, letting the highway lines blur into a hypnotic rhythm. She changed her clothes inside a truck-stop bathroom, swapping the hoodie for a plain black long-sleeve shirt and pulling her hair into 2 tight braids. Every change was meant to disrupt the image Jaehoon's network would be looking for. She knew they would be looking for a black woman in her 20s, maybe heading toward a major southern city. That much was unavoidable. But she was relying on the fact that her history, her past as a competitive fighter, was so well buried, so deeply guarded by Leo, that it wouldn't be easy to uncover. Around midnight, somewhere in North Carolina, she stopped at a deserted gas station to fill the tank. As she was pumping gas, she saw a large, expensive-looking black sedan, the kind that didn't belong in this dusty, rural area, pulling up slowly across the street. Ailey's training kicked in. She didn't look directly at the car, but her peripheral vision tracked every movement. The car stopped, and 2 men got out. They were both Asian, wearing dark suits, and they had the telltale bulk of professional muscle. They weren't looking at her yet, but they were scanning the street methodically. Ailey instantly recognized the expensive tailoring and the cold, focused attention that signaled Jaehoon's crew. They had found her faster than she thought. They must have checked her bus ticket destination and were simply setting up checkpoints on the major route south. Panic tried to grip her, but she crushed it instantly. Panic was death. She finished pumping the gas, moving with forced calmness. She paid for the gas and a bottle of water inside the station, her heart rate spiking, but her face a mask of bored exhaustion. As she got back into her rental car, she heard one of the men across the street talking loudly into a phone in clipped Korean. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was aggressive, urgent. She pulled out of the station slowly, resisting the urge to slam the accelerator. She had to blend in, appear like any other tired traveler. She drove for 5 tense minutes down the highway until she saw a small, barely visible dirt road cutting off into a thick patch of woods. It was a terrible road, but it was salvation. Ailey didn't hesitate. She hit the brakes, signaling a turn onto the main road, but then swerved hard, taking the little sedan bouncing and rattling onto the dirt track. The woods closed in immediately, swallowing the car in darkness. The tires spun on the loose earth, but she kept the speed manageable. She checked her rearview mirror. Sure enough, the black sedan had seen her move and was now trying to follow, the car's expensive suspension struggling with the rough terrain. She wasn't trying to outrun them completely yet. She was trying to shake them long enough to lose the easy trail. She drove for what felt like an eternity, the road getting rougher until it became almost impassable. Finally, she stopped the car deep within the woods, turned off the engine, and cut the headlights. Silence descended, thick and absolute. She grabbed her backpack, took a deep breath, and slid out of the car. She wasn't driving anymore. She was moving on foot. The boxer's body was now her only vehicle. She ran through the trees parallel to the dirt road, keeping the car visible through the thicket. A few minutes later, she heard the loud, frustrated roar of the Mafia car's engine as the driver tried to force it past a deep rut. They were close, but they were still stuck to the road. Ailey didn't wait. She moved deeper into the forest, using her years of rigorous training, running, jumping, dodging, to navigate the uneven terrain in the dark. She was a runner now, but she wasn't running from fear, she was running with purpose. She ran for a full hour, moving until she hit a small, quiet secondary road. She knew she was putting distance between herself and the frustrated Mafia crew stuck in the mud. She looked up at the moon, which was just beginning to peek through the clouds. It was going to be an impossible journey, a race against an enemy that had the whole world as its playground. But every mile she covered, every shadow she used, was a small, hard-won victory. She was the viral sensation that the powerful wanted to use or destroy. But they were underestimating her willpower, her training, and the sheer desperation that fueled her flight. She was heading toward the sun, toward Jamaica, toward the only friend she had left, carrying the weight of the entire underworld on her shoulders. Her fate was now tied to that single, perfect punch. She was bruised, tired, and terrified, but she was alive, and she was fighting. Hope, just like the dawn, was rising slowly in the east, urging her forward. The humid, heavy air of Miami felt like a wet blanket compared to the cold snap Ailey had left behind in Toronto. She had survived the long, tense journey south, ditching the rental car in Georgia and covering the final miles with a mix of shared rides and walking, always paying in small, untraceable bundles of cash. Miami wasn't a place for hiding, it was a place for showing off. The energy was too loud, the sun too bright, and the people too focused on fast, easy money. This was exactly why it made a good temporary cover. In a city this busy and this loud, a quiet person could easily disappear into the background noise, like a single grain of sand on a vast, busy beach. Ailey needed cash and a way to stay close to the water, where her rendezvous with Leo's contact was scheduled to take place. She quickly found work at a busy, run-down seafood shack right near the docks. It was called Captain Cal's, and it specialized in cheap fried fish and greasy hush puppies. She wasn't serving tables this time, though. She was a cleaner. She had shed the mint green uniform and adopted a new one, faded blue jeans, an oversized gray t-shirt, and a perpetually weary expression. Her hair was now often hidden beneath a bandana, and she wore cheap, thick-rimmed glasses that obscured the intensity in her amber eyes. She looked like a tired student working a summer job to pay for textbooks. Her new boss, a heavy-set, exhausted man named Raoul who was always wiping sweat from his brow, didn't care about background checks. He cared that she showed up on time and scrubbed the grease out of the fryer vents without complaint. This was her new routine. She arrived at 6 a.m., mopped floors slick with fish oil, took out the steaming trash, and scrubbed counters until her arms ached. She was the definition of invisible. And she played the part perfectly. If a cook snapped at her, she nodded and apologized softly. If Raoul barked an unreasonable order, she dropped what she was doing and obeyed instantly. She never argued, never pushed back, and never made eye contact. She was the personification of the title, the waitress who never fights back. It was a total lie, but it was the only thing keeping her alive. The other workers, mostly older, hard-working immigrants, paid her no mind. They saw a shy girl, quiet and dedicated. They couldn't know that the girl who was scrubbing dried ketchup off a booth cushion was the same one who had put a feared mafia boss to sleep with a single blow. Ailey's only true sanctuary was the cramped, hot room she rented above a dilapidated laundromat several blocks away. The room smelled permanently of bleach and mildew, but it had a lock on the door and a window that overlooked a fire escape. Every night, after her shift ended and the moon was high, the waitress mask came off. Ailey would lock the door, turn off the dim light, and stand in the center of the small, stuffy room. The sound of washing machines humming below was her soundtrack. She would take a deep breath, and then she would begin. She didn't use any equipment. No heavy bags, no speed bags, no ring. She used only the air and the memory of the past. This was her shadowboxing. In the darkness, the tired cleaner vanished. The true champion emerged. Her feet started moving, silent and quick, sliding across the cheap linoleum floor. Her body became a coiled spring of controlled energy. It was a beautiful, terrifying dance. Jab, jab, cross. The punches were sharp and fast. They weren't just movements, they were surgical strikes. She moved her head, weaving and slipping with the fluidity of water, dodging ghost opponents only she could see. Her form was flawless, taught by years of relentless training under Leo's watchful eye. Every muscle, from her strong calves to her shoulders, moved in perfect harmony. The air around her would snap with the force of her strikes. She wasn't fighting an imaginary man, she was fighting the fear, the guilt, and the impossible situation she was in. Tonight, as she pivoted perfectly and delivered a ferocious combination, a deep tremor of pain shot through her soul, momentarily breaking her focus. The memory was immediate and visceral, brought on by the familiar rhythm of the fight. She saw the bright, blinding lights. She smelled the thick, metallic tang of the arena. She heard the roar of 10,000 people, all screaming her name, Alia the Apex Du Bois. The memory wasn't of winning. It was of loss. A devastating, life-altering loss. It was 3 years ago, at Madison Square Garden. She was 20, undefeated, and fighting for the world title she felt she was born to hold. She was fighting a cruel, relentless opponent named Serena. In the final round, Alia had landed a knockout blow. The bell rang, the crowd erupted, and Alia raised her arms in triumph. But when she looked across the ring, she saw Serena stumble, not just from the punch, but from a sudden, sharp, inexplicable look of agony. Days later, Alia learned the devastating truth. Serena, who had pushed herself too hard to make weight, collapsed from a severe complication caused by dehydration and the final blow. Serena survived, but the damage was permanent. Her career was over. Her life was fundamentally changed. Alia was cleared by every commission. It was an accident. It was the risk of the sport. But to Alia, it was a tragedy, and it was her fault. She had chased the glory, and another person had paid the ultimate price. That was the night she quit. That was the night she gave up the title, the money, the fame, and the future. She made a vow: I will never raise my hands in violence again. That vow was what she was running from now. That single, necessary punch she threw at Jae-hoon Kwon had saved an old man's dignity, but it had shattered her self-imposed exile. Exhausted, Alia finished the routine, her breathing ragged but controlled. She leaned against the damp wall, her body glistening with sweat, the smell of bleach mixing with the scent of her exertion. You're still the best, Apex, she whispered into the darkness, using the fighting nickname she hadn't spoken aloud in years. While Alia was fighting her ghosts, the real threats were closing in on Miami. Jae-hoon Kwon's network had managed to trace Alia's bus connections and the rental car drop-off point. They knew she was in the southeast. They had operatives working the ports, the airports, and the major shipping hubs in Florida. Jae-hoon wasn't messing around, he was pouring millions into finding her, fueled by his unbearable shame. One of his agents, a clean-cut man named Minho who specialized in tracing digital footprints, was sitting in a high-rise Miami hotel room, looking at the city's network of cameras. We have a positive match, boss, Minho reported over a secure line to Jae-hoon, who was now in a temporary office in New York. She's using all cash. No credit cards. But one of her old social media contacts, a low-level acquaintance from Toronto, posted a blurry photo of a girl looking just like her, near a dockside seafood place here in Miami yesterday. She was wearing an oversized gray shirt. The place is called Captain Cal's. Jae-hoon's voice was cold steel. A seafood shack. Perfect. Send 2 teams. 1 to observe, 1 to secure. I want her alive, Minho. And I want the operation quiet. No more viral videos. Meanwhile, Victoria Vance's team was also making progress, but in a different way. Elias, Victoria's chief of operations, was using old-school boxing connections. He had traced Alia's fighting history back to a single gym in Toronto and, more importantly, to her former trainer, Leo Maxwell, who lived in Jamaica. We can't find her, but we know where she's going, Elias told Victoria, who was now relaxing on her yacht off the Florida coast. She trained under Leo Maxwell. They are close. Leo runs a gym in Kingston. We believe she is heading to the Caribbean, possibly Jamaica, to hide out with him. Victoria smiled, adjusting her designer sunglasses. Brilliant, Elias. The sea is a much better place for hunting than the streets. Focus on the ports of departure. See if you can find the boat she's taking. I don't want to fight the Kwon Syndicate over her. I want to intercept her first, offer her a life-changing deal, and put her in my main event. Alia was literally caught between a hunter who wanted her destroyed and a predator who wanted her used. Both threats were converging on the small seafood shack she cleaned every morning. The next day, Alia arrived for her early shift. She was tired but energized by the realization that her past wasn't just a painful memory, it was the sharpest tool she had. Her fighting skill was the reason she was in danger, but it was also the only thing that could get her out of it. Raoul, her boss, was waiting for her outside, looking agitated. Alia, there's a problem, he mumbled, gesturing nervously. A very bad problem. 2 men. They look like trouble. They asked for the new girl. They asked for you. Ailey's heart sank, but her mind stayed clear. It was too fast. Jaehoon's men were already here. What did you tell them? She asked, her voice low. I told them I only had old women working here. But they left a note. Said they will be back tonight. They looked like they meant business. Raoul wrung his hands. You need to go, Ailey. Now. I don't want their trouble near my shop. Ailey nodded once. Raoul hadn't betrayed her, but he couldn't protect her either. The clean uniform, the anonymity, the quiet routine, it was all compromised. She turned to leave, but as she did, she saw them. Not the two men who had visited earlier. These were different. Across the street, sitting in a black SUV with tinted windows, she saw a woman who looked strikingly like the picture Elias had shown Victoria Vance, sharp, stylish, and looking directly at Captain Cowles. She wasn't Korean Mafia, but she carried the unmistakable air of wealth and control. They had found her. All of them. Ailey ducked into a narrow alleyway between two storage buildings. She didn't have time to call Leo or wait for the boat rendezvous. She had to move now. She pulled off the cheap glasses, tossing them into a dumpster, and pulled the bandana off her hair, letting the curls spill out. The cleaner was gone. The champion was running, this time not just from a past mistake, but toward the desperate hope of freedom. She ran toward the docks, toward the maze of rusty shipping containers and heavy machinery. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, the money in her pocket, and the perfect, terrifying skill in her fists. She was a refugee in her own life, but she was armed with a secret strength that the hunters couldn't even imagine. The fight was messy, dangerous, and far from over, but as she looked out at the vast, shimmering ocean, the only escape left, she felt a surge of pure, primal hope. She wouldn't just run, she would survive. The sea was waiting. Jaehoon Kwon wasn't used to waking up to pain. He was used to inflicting it. But this morning, he woke up in a suite in a private, high-end New York apartment, and his world was nothing but a dull, throbbing ache that originated squarely in his jaw. The kind of ache that even the strongest painkiller couldn't dull completely. He was lying in a ridiculously soft silk bed. The room was huge, decorated in cold, modern grays and blacks, like a billionaire's cage. A simple white compression bandage was wrapped around his jaw and over the top of his head. He tried to speak, but the movement sent a fresh wave of agony through his skull. The physical pain was bad. But the shame was 10 times worse. He didn't need to see the video again to remember every crushing detail. The arrogant look on his face, the casual dismissal of the waitress, the smooth, horrifying perfection of her punch, and the heavy, humiliating drop to the ground. He, Jaehoon Kwon, the man who commanded respect through sheer terror, had been knocked out by a woman in a cheap, mint-green diner dress. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the memory, but it was useless. It played like a movie reel inside his mind. He could hear voices in the next room, a low, constant murmur. It was Marcus and Chen, along with Minho, the tech specialist. They thought they were being quiet, but Jaehoon's ears were trained to hear disrespect even in silence. He pushed himself up, leaning against the velvet headboard. He was a terrifying sight, a wealthy, powerful man reduced to a bandaged invalid. I'm just saying, did you see the form? That was Chen, his voice low and tight. It was flawless. Like a machine. He never even saw it coming. Marcus's voice rumbled in response. Yeah, but still, the boss, taking a knockout from a waitress? In front of all those people? If the higher-ups hear about this, he's finished. No respect left. Minho cut in quickly, sounding nervous. It's already bad, Marcus. The video reached every rival gang from Boston to Chicago. They're calling her the Ghost Punch. They are laughing at the Kwon name. They weren't just whispering about the knockout. They were whispering about him. They were judging his strength, questioning his dominance. They were talking about his ruin. Jaehoon swung his legs over the side of the bed. The movement was slow, painful, but deliberate. The thin wires holding his organization together, the fear, the respect, the absolute obedience, were snapping one by one, thanks to that 30-second clip. The only way to re-weld those wires was with blood and absolute, terrifying revenge. He walked slowly, stiffly, into the sitting room. His sudden appearance stopped the whispering instantly. Marcus, Chen, and Minho snapped to attention, their faces instantly becoming masks of cool professionalism, but the lingering fear and judgment were still hanging in the air like smoke. Jae-hoon didn't need to speak. He didn't need to yell. He just looked at them, his eyes flat and cold, promising a horrifying fate for anyone who showed disloyalty. Finally, he spoke, his voice coming out as a strained, painful rasp. The reports. Miami. Minho jumped forward, holding a tablet. Yes, boss. We confirmed she was in Miami. She worked temporarily at a seafood shack called Captain Cow's near the docks. She left just hours ago. We found the rental car she ditched in Georgia, too. She's going south. She's definitely heading for the Caribbean. She's trying to meet a boat. Jae-hoon nodded slowly. A boat. She has a contact. Someone taught her that punch. Find the contact. Find the boat. And find the girl. He pointed a finger, still trembling slightly from the punch's aftershocks, at Marcus. Marcus, I want you in Miami now. Take a small team. Quietly. Find the docks. Find her boat. I want eyes on her until I can travel and deal with her myself. His voice was laced with pure venom as he uttered his vow. I don't care if she is a champion. I don't care if she is a ghost. I will shatter her before she reaches the ocean. She embarrassed me. She will pay with everything she holds dear. My name is Kwon Jae-hoon. Nobody ruins my reputation and lives to tell the story. The fear in the room solidified. The whispering stopped. The hunt was now a blood feud driven by a boss's wounded pride. Meanwhile, Ailey was struggling to keep moving through the suffocating heat of the Miami docks. The maze of metal containers, heavy machinery, and constant noise of cranes was her last best chance at hiding. She was running on sheer instinct now, using the cover of the massive, stacked shipping containers to move quickly and avoid detection. She knew Jae-hoon's men, and possibly Victoria Vance's too, were closing in on Captain Cal's, which was just a short, dangerous sprint away. She had to locate the boat Leo had arranged. The code was simple: look for the old, rusty fishing trawler named the Regret. The captain would be wearing a bright yellow bandana. She moved with the precision she used in the ring, slipping through narrow gaps between cargo, her eyes constantly scanning the shadows. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and fear. Suddenly, she stopped dead behind a huge stack of containers labeled for shipping to Central America. She heard the distinct, heavy sound of professional leather shoes crunching on gravel. She flattened herself against the cold, corrugated steel, holding her breath. Two men walked past her hiding spot, speaking in low, clipped Korean. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was urgent, and one of them was holding a phone, looking at a picture, undoubtedly, her face. They were wearing the telltale expensive suits of Jae-hoon's crew, looking completely out of place against the grime of the docks. They were everywhere. The net was tightening. Ailey allowed herself a small, silent moment of pure terror. She was one person against an army of resources and hatred. Her freedom, her life, depended entirely on finding one specific, beat-up boat among 1,000 others. She watched the men move toward the main pier where the larger vessels were docked, searching the ships' names. That was her chance. She knew Leo wouldn't use a large freighter, he would use a small, fast vessel that could slip away unnoticed. She headed in the opposite direction, toward the smaller, less used fishing piers. This entire saga, the desperation, the running, the fear, all came down to one truth: skill saves lives. Without the years of brutal training, without the strength she had tried to abandon, she would have been captured or killed hours ago. The training was her only ticket to survival. We are now right in the middle of this high-stakes escape. Ailey is using everything she learned in the boxing ring to navigate the most dangerous maze in her life. It makes you wonder, if you were in her shoes, what skill you would rely on to survive. Ailey reached the fishing pier. It was rickety, smelling strongly of old fish and salt water. There were dozens of small boats tied up here, bobbing gently in the murky water. Her heart pounded as she scanned the vessels. The Regret. She had to find the Regret. She passed a sailboat named Ocean Dream, a small trawler named Sea Spray, and then, almost hidden behind a mountain of fishing nets, she saw it. It was exactly as Leo described: old, rusted, and looking barely seaworthy. Painted on the stern in faded blue letters was the name, The Regret. Relief washed over her, so intense it almost made her dizzy. But she wasn't safe yet. She quickly scanned the deck. A figure was bent over the boat's engine hatch, tinkering with a wrench. The figure was short and stocky, wearing old, faded denim overalls, and tied around their neck, partially tucked into the shirt, was a flash of bright yellow bandana. Ailey didn't hesitate. She walked quickly down the pier, her footsteps light despite her exhaustion. "Excuse me," she said softly, approaching the figure. "Are you the captain of this vessel?" The person slowly straightened up. It wasn't a man, but a tough-looking woman in her mid-50s, her skin tanned and weathered by the sun, her eyes sharp and intelligent. The woman didn't smile. She just looked Ailey up and down, taking in the tired eyes, the faint bruise on her cheek, and the backpack that screamed fleeing. "That depends," the captain said, her voice rough, like gravel. "Are you bringing the sun back to Jamaica?" That was the second part of the code word. It meant, "Are you the fighter Leo sent?" "I am," Ailey said, letting out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "I am bringing the sun." The captain's expression finally softened, though only slightly. She knew the danger they were in, Leo would have told her. "Then get on board, girl. We're already late. We've got company closing in on the main pier. They look like the kind of trouble that pays well for information, and I don't like those odds." The captain dropped the wrench and gestured toward the small cabin. "I'm Captain Maria. Get below deck. Don't make a sound until we're out of the harbor." Ailey climbed aboard the trawler, the deck swaying gently beneath her feet. It was dirty, cramped, and smelled strongly of bilge water and fish, but it was the most beautiful thing she had seen in days. It was her salvation. Captain Maria quickly moved to the wheelhouse, throwing the engine into gear. The boat sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life, pulling slowly away from the dock. Just as the Regret was making its turn out of the fishing pier and into the wider harbor channel, Ailey risked one look back. She saw them. 4 black sedans, pulling up rapidly to the main pier, Jehoon's men spilling out, flooding the area where the large ships were docked. Marcus, the giant bodyguard, was clearly visible, pointing frantically at the names of the big vessels. They were looking in the wrong place. They had missed her by seconds. Ailey sank down onto the floor of the cabin, the sounds of the powerful engine filling her ears. She was bruised, exhausted, hunted, and now sailing toward an uncertain future. But for the first time since that terrible night in the diner, she felt a profound sense of hope. Justice, in the form of a quiet escape, had won the first round. The sea was dark and vast, but she was free, at least for now, and headed to the only home she had left. Back in the cold, opulent silence of his New York suite, Jae-hoon Kwon was waiting for one thing: information. He wasn't waiting for an apology or a cure for his aching jaw. He was waiting for the name, the history, the weakness of the girl who had dared to touch him. His chief investigator, Min-ho, returned from Toronto looking like a man who had stared into a black hole. He stood before Jae-hoon, his composure slightly rattled, which was unusual for the normally precise agent. Marcus, the bodyguard, stood nearby, sullen and silent. "Boss," Min-ho began, his voice carefully neutral. "We have traced every legal and digital avenue. We've used every connection in the police, government, and financial sector in Toronto, all the way back to her birth year." Jae-hoon looked at him, his bandaged jaw preventing any expression of impatience, but the cold fire in his eyes was enough. "And?" Min-ho swallowed hard. "And nothing, boss. The file doesn't exist." Jae-hoon's hands, resting on the armrests of his chair, tightened into fists. The knuckles went white. "Explain what you mean by nothing." "Every person has a history. A family. School records. A utility bill." "She has none, sir. Ailey Dubois is a ghost. The ID she used to get the job at the Golden Grill was registered only 3 years ago in Toronto. It's a clean identity, legally created, but there are no historical threads connected to it." Min-ho tapped his tablet, showing a blank screen. No high school or university enrollment anywhere. No immunization records. No parents listed in any Canadian or US database. No financial history before 3 years ago that wasn't cash only. She is a woman in her 20s who, according to paper, didn't exist until she started serving coffee in a diner. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jae-hoon's fury wasn't loud or explosive, it was deep and terrifyingly controlled. This wasn't just a physical assault on him, It was an insult to his intelligence. She is not a student, Jae-hoon hissed, the movement hurting his jaw, but he didn't care. She has the skill of a professional fighter. A master. Where did she train? Minho's face brightened slightly. That's the only crack we found, boss. We used facial recognition on the blurred diner footage, cross-referencing it with the underground fight scene databases, the illegal ones, of course. Her face isn't there, but the technique is so unique, so clean, it belongs to a very specific school of fighting. He paused, lowering his voice. We traced the style back to an old, small, semi-legitimate boxing gym in the outskirts of Toronto. It shut down years ago. The owner was a former manager named Leo Maxwell. Black, ex-fighter. We found a few blurry training photos from 5 years ago. They showed a younger girl, smaller, training in that style. Is it her? Jae-hoon demanded. We can't be sure. But Mr. Maxwell's last known address is in Kingston, Jamaica. He runs a small, community gym there now. She fled toward Miami, the Caribbean. The geography matches the only name we have besides Ailey Dubois, Leo Maxwell. Jae-hoon leaned back, closing his eyes, calculating. The problem wasn't a waitress. The problem was an invisible enemy. She was a professional ghost, carefully hiding a lethal past. He had underestimated her skill, and now he was paying the price. Jamaica, Jae-hoon murmured. She is running to her teacher. She is running to her home. Fine. The land route is closed. We take the sea. He opened his eyes. Minho, contact our people in Port Everglades, Miami, and the Caribbean Coast Guard. Offer them triple. I want every single vessel heading south checked. Look for a small trawler, old, inconspicuous. Find out which ships belong to people connected to Leo Maxwell. Marcus, you will fly to the Cayman Islands. Start setting up a naval intercept point. We will not let her make land. She will pay for this on the water. The quiet room hummed with the activation of a vast, lethal machine. Jae-hoon Kwon was no longer just chasing revenge, he was chasing a mystery that threatened his entire reputation. He would uncover the file that didn't exist, even if it meant destroying the entire world to do it. Far away from the cold fury of the Mafia boss, Alia and Captain Maria were several hours out from the coast of Florida, cutting a steady, choppy path through the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic. The regret was small and slow, but it was powerful enough to handle the rough seas. Below deck, the air was thick with the smell of diesel and damp wood. Alia was huddled in a tiny, makeshift bunk, wrapped in an old, scratchy blanket. Captain Maria was a sturdy, quiet woman who looked like she could wrestle a shark and win. Her skin was deeply lined by the sun, and she had the kind of calm eyes that had seen everything and judged nothing. Ailey watched her come down the steep ladder from the wheelhouse. Rough night tonight, kid, Maria said simply, wiping sea spray from her face. You holding up? I'm fine, Maria. Thank you. For everything, Ailey replied softly. She meant it. Maria was a silent guardian, a kind stranger risking her life for a friend of a friend. Maria sat on a nearby crate. Don't thank me. Thank Leo. He told me your family. And he said you're the strongest person he ever met. Said you just forgot how strong you were. Ailey looked down at her hands, the hands that had delivered the punch that changed everything. I didn't forget. I decided not to be strong anymore. It costs too much. Everything costs, honey, Maria said, her voice gentle but firm. Running costs your freedom. Hiding costs your life. Fighting might cost you your peace, but it might buy you your future. Ailey knew Maria didn't know the whole truth, the story of Serena, the promise she made. But the sentiment was right. The past few days had taught her that even her ghost-like existence was too much for the darkness to tolerate. She was paying the cost of hiding, and the bill was due. She decided to ask Maria a painful question. Leo said you know the business. The people hunting me. Are they checking records? Papers? They won't find anything on Ailey Dubois, but... Maria nodded slowly, confirming the terrible secret. Leo told me you became a ghost to run from your fighting past. That's smart. The Mafia, they check the easy paths first. Birth certificates, school files, bank statements. If the name Ailey Dubois is only 3 years old, they're hitting a wall of nothing. That's good. But they won't stop, Ailey stated, feeling the cold dread settle in. No, they won't. They'll switch to the hard paths, Maria confirmed. They will look for the absence of a file. They will look for connections to known figures. They will look at the people who helped you disappear. Like Leo. Ailey felt a sharp pang of guilt. I should have never called him. You had no choice. You're his family. But listen to me, kid. They will find the boxing connection. They will find Leo's old gym in Toronto. They will figure out you are a champion. And when they do, they will come for Leo, hoping you will come out of hiding. Ailey's eyes hardened. Her painful past was one thing, putting Leo in danger was another. He was the kindest man she knew. We'll be in Jamaican waters by tomorrow morning, maybe early afternoon if the current holds, Maria said, sensing Ailey's shift in mood. Leo is waiting for you in a safe place. He has a plan. He's tough, remember? But you need to be tougher. You need to stop being Ailey Dubois, the tired waitress. You need to be the apex again. That punch wasn't a mistake. It was the only honest thing you've done in 3 years. Ailey looked out the small, smudged porthole at the immense, dark ocean. It was a terrifying world, full of sharks and shadows. But it was also the path to Leo, her only protector. She knew that while the Mafia was searching for a woman with no past, they would soon find a woman with a dangerous legacy. Her true identity, the life she abandoned, was her only shield now. She lay back, closing her eyes, letting the gentle rocking of the regret lull her into a brief, exhausted sleep. She wasn't safe yet. The water was only a temporary barrier. But she was moving toward the one person who could teach her how to fight, not just for herself, but for the hope of a future where justice wasn't just a dream. She was heading home to the Caribbean, and for the first time in days, the fear was mixed with a sliver of fierce resolve. Her non-existent file was the most dangerous thing the Mafia had ever chased, and she was going to make them regret every step of the hunt.